Hello and welcome to Season 13, Episode 31 of the Ubuntu Podcast. It's a dark old day on Tuesday the 20th of October. The nights are drawing in, and this week we're going to discuss the community news and events, and we're going to have some news headlines. But first up, let's meet the team. Martin, how's it going?
Hello, very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. What have you been up to recently?
I have been building a new computer.
Oh, goodness me. Another one?
So it's nearly 2 years since I built the last one. And I couldn't...
New things have come out since then.
Yeah, so AMD announced their 5000 series mainstream Ryzen processors, and I was seeing if they were going to announce new Threadrippers, which they haven't. So I've built myself a Threadripper-based system based on the current generation, in the hope that in a year or so I can upgrade to the new ones.
These are their crazy amounts of cores, very high performance processors.
Yeah, I've got a 3970, so it's 32 cores, 64 threads.
Well, that'll do. And what are you going to use that for? Playing Doom and stuff?
Commodore 64 emulation.
But 32 of them, right?
Yeah. And I thought, if you're going to get a high-end desktop part, then you may as well, go fully in. So I've also equipped it with 256 gigs of RAM.
Gosh.
That's a lot.
Yeah. How many sticks do you need to get that much RAM these days?
8 32 gig sticks.
Gosh. And a very large case, I imagine. We spoke about your very large case. Is this the same one?
Yeah, it's the same case. It's a Corsair Carbide Air 540. And I deliberately bought this one a couple of years ago because it's big. And I thought it doesn't matter what I want to do in the future, I'll be able to reuse that case.
I see. Yes.
So yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with that. And I've obviously plonked my new RTX 3090 in it. And those two things together, that's rather good. And I've got another big upgrade coming to this computer in a couple of weeks, so that'll give me something to talk about in the future. But I'm fully embracing the PCI Gen 4, future.
Well, more of that to come then. Alan, hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Yeah, all right.
Oh, good. What have you been doing then?
I have been playing with eBay.
Oh, is that a new game?
It is a good game, yes. You upload photographs of things and people send you money, and then you put things in envelopes and send them to people. So I've been getting rid of some stuff, getting rid of some stuff that I just don't use anymore. Mm-hmm. And I got rid of a couple of old video games, an old handheld Pac-Man and Scramble and a couple of other bits and bobs. And I was getting like a tenner here and a fiver there. And then Sam, my 14-year-old son, came in and said, I think I need to get rid of some Pokemon cards. And I said, okay. And he cherry-picked one of them. And he said, can we take photos of this one and chuck it on eBay? So we did. And within a few minutes of me putting it on eBay, people were asking questions about the cleanliness and quality of this card. It's in very good, perfect condition. And then the bids started coming in within minutes, and it was up to about 40 quid.
What?
And then Sophie came home and I said, I've just chucked one of Sam's Pokemon cards on eBay. And she said, oh yeah, how much has it got? And I pulled my phone out to look at the eBay app and I refreshed it and it went from £39 to £250.
Wow.
In no time at all for a small piece of card.
What Pokemon was it?
Charmander, I think.
Okay. I don't know much about, in fact, I know nothing about Pokemon whatsoever. So this must be rare, highly sought after card.
You would think so, yes.
It can't be the bog standard Charmander, presumably.
I can't tell you what it is. It's Charmander XY 11 of 108, and it's got hollow picture, and it's in really, really good condition, and there's no nicks or scratches or anything because it's never been played with. It's just been sat in the slip. And that's one of a number of cards that he wants me to put on eBay. So as soon as the guy paid me for it and I was like preparing it for shipping, Sam was like, so where's the money then? I'm like, well, it's in my PayPal account. Well, can you transfer it to my account now, please? Like, right, okay. Yeah, sure, I'll do that.
I assume he's planning a PC upgrade of his own with that money.
That is exactly what he's planning to do, yes. You are a bad influence on him, Martin.
Sorry.
Wait until you send him your eBay invoice for this month.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Well, with that, on with the show. And now it's time for community news and events, possibly. We'll find out later. And first up in the community news, Alan.
The Windows Calculator is available on Linux via the Uno platform.
What is the Uno platform?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Side note, I was slightly involved in this. Uno platform is a way to create cross-platform applications. We've talked about Flutter in the past, and Uno is similar in that it's a way for developers to create applications and then for them to look native on whichever platform it's running on, which is quite cool. And as a demo, the people who made this Uno platform recreated the Windows Calculator on Linux and published it in the Snap Store for a bit of fun. So
this isn't the actual Windows Calculator from Windows?
It has some lineage to the Windows Calculator, yes. But it was more a bit of a fun thing to show, here's something that is, familiar to you from the Windows world, and you can compile that and ship it in the store. It uses WebAssembly, C#, XAML, I think it's called, so you get one code base, which is the goal of cross-platform. And the whole thing's open source and built on Mono. Mono rides again.
Yeah.
So I installed this, and actually, as calculators go, this is quite useful because apart from doing the usual, sums, scientific programmer version, it's got converters for, volume, length, weight, mass, temperature, energy, area, speed, time, everything you can think of. So it's actually really useful because usually when I get into doing things like that, I have to go and find some random converter on the internet in order to do that. And here it is, it's all baked in and
that's handy to know.
Running on my machine here. It's rather good.
It was never intended that this would be the pinnacle of calculation experiences for you on your Linux desktop. It's a side benefit that it is useful to you. It was more a demo, a simple, what could we package up that people would recognize from another operating system that we can, bring over to Linux and show, is possible for you to have one code base and very easily have native looking applications on all of the platforms. So if you're a software developer and you're interested in creating applications and C#, perhaps through Mono, then have a look at Uno platform.
Great. Martin, what have OMG Ubuntu been doing this week?
Well, they've been taking a look at the Microsoft Edge browser on Linux, and I was inspired to do the same. So I have also installed Microsoft Edge on my new computer.
Is it really, really fast?
Yes. Unfortunately, I can't tell you how well it performs to the other browsers because just everything is as fast as lightning at the moment. So I can't tell if it's any faster or slower than any of the others.
That is the first world of first world problems. My computer is so fast, I can't tell you how fast it is.
Yes. I taking a quick look at it at a surface level, it's very reminiscent of Chrome or Chromium in terms of sort of the initial user interface. But when you start to dig into it a little bit, particularly in the settings, it's clearly very different from Chrome at that point. And the first thing you see when you start it up is a little animation that tells you we value your privacy. And then that message is repeated several times over throughout the settings of the browser. So there's privacy and cookie settings where that message is repeated. And the privacy and cookie settings are very detailed and lengthy, and considerably more attention has been paid there than any of the other parts of the settings. But I also noticed it's got family safety, so it's got parental controls. So you can connect the browsers together and you can set your children's, browsing preferences and site blocking and audit what they've been looking at and stuff, which I was kind of impressed with.
Interesting.
And it has this thing called collections. What's all that about?
Yeah, I've not tried that out yet, but apparently it's a way to actually save, archive versions of a site inside the browser. So it's not a link to a site. It's actually the site
copy.
as it appeared at that time. And I haven't looked into this, so I don't know if it updates it automatically in the background or not.
Is that kind of like, I think Internet Explorer used to do a download this web page, which basically packaged a web page and all of its assets in a file.
It's same as an MHTML file or
MHT,
something.
yes,
Yeah, MHT,
which nothing else could read.
Yes.
So I've used this on a couple of sites, and you can create sort of groups of collections. And I could see this being useful if you're wanting to research something. You could go off and sort of hoover up lots of data and categorize it. And then when you're offline, you can then go back and look at all of that and, use the information that you've collated. So I thought that was kind of a nifty feature.
So one of the things that people keep saying before Edge came out was, it's just Chromium. It's just Chromium with a Microsoft badge on it, and they're just coming along to spy on you, and there's nothing new. It sounds like they actually have added features, which, knocks that into a cocked hat slightly.
Yeah.
Are you going to continue using it, or is it unstable? Or
Well, I'm using it to talk to you both now.
Oh, wow. That's why you're upside down. Right, okay.
So for the listeners' benefit, we use Jitsi to converse with one another. So I'm using it for that. And I thought I'd have a little look around. It integrates nicely with the Ubuntu dock, just like the other browsers do. Mm-hmm. There's no native title bar, things that they present as they want them to. And extensions appear to work. So if you go to a site and it wants to give you a Chrome extension, that appears to function. And there's a full suite of extensions available from the Microsoft Edge site. So I installed my password manager just fine, logged into a few things, and Netflix works as well. So I watched an episode of Discovery Season 3 using the Edge browser earlier as well.
No spoilers, please.
No, none to be given.
Is that the one with Luke in it?
No, not again.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll give it a try.
Next up, Ubuntu Community Council elections are happening again. For the first time in a while, voting has now begun for the Ubuntu Community Council elections. So if you are an Ubuntu member, we will have a link in the show notes for you to follow and vote by Saturday, October the 24th. Is there a rule that says you have to have been a member for a length of time before you can vote, or could people just go and join up now and then?
Well, you can't just join up. You have to go through a process with the membership board who determine whether you qualify, which the general consensus is sustained and significant contribution to Ubuntu over a period of time. So, anyone who's involved in Ubuntu for some months would, whose contribution is measurable, and that contribution doesn't have to be code. It can be artwork or support or testing or any one of a number of things.
Presenting a popular podcast?
I imagine so. I mean, if you've done it for, 5 or 6 years or so, possibly.
Yeah.
Are you not a member yet, Mark?
No, I'm not. I never.
Lord. So yeah, I'm not on the membership board. I used to be, but if I was on it, you'd get a +1 from me.
Yeah.
And once you're a member, then you get a special link it's your own unique link, and then they use the Condorcet voting system where you just rank all the people in the order that you prefer, and then some maths happens somewhere when the thing closes in a few days, and then they publish the results.
Cool.
I had a look through the list of people that have put themselves forward, and there's some names there that you'll recognise from the current flavours. So some sort of well-known contributors, to Ubuntu in the flavours community. But then I was also pleased to see quite a lot of names sort of from the past who are sort of, rebooting their involvement in the Ubuntu community as well. So there's a fairly broad group of people to choose from.
And some names I didn't recognise at all. And everyone has to create their wiki page so you can, research them and find out, in what way they've contributed and what their pitch is. And then you can use that to decide, how you're going to use your votes. So we shall find out who the new community council are, probably by the next time we do a show.
Yes.
And finally, in the community news, Martin.
LibreOffice is now sporting a Uru Icon Set in Ubuntu 2010.
Ooh. Cool. Will that be set by default then?
It is going to be set by default, yes. So this is in LibreOffice 7.02, I think, is what we're going to be shipping. And it just sort of completes the sort of visual coherence of, the different applications and the style and the theme. I mean, the icon set on the rest of the desktop has had a bit of a refresh as well. So there's a number of icons that have been given some attention this cycle. But if you are an LTS user, then good news. You can also get that new icon set for LibreOffice 6, which is what was shipped in the 2004 LTS, via a LibreOffice extension. And we'll have a link to the article where you can find out how to do all of that.
Great.
Nice.
And that's all the community news for this week. And now it's time for some news headlines. And first up this week, Alan.
Yeah, the Register have got an article about the lack of updates to cups recently. And for those of you who don't know about the internals of Linux, cups is previously known as the Common Unix Printing System. I think people just call it cups now. The acronym isn't really used. And there's not been many updates to it recently. And it's got a bit of an interesting history, cups, because I think the lead developer, Michael Sweet, worked on it for a fair while. And then in 2007, Apple released macOS 10, and they shipped it with cups because it's a Unixy-like operating system. They used cups to implement their printing system over there. Mm-hmm. And they hired Michael Sweet, the cups developer, to continue working on it, to keep maintaining it while it's shipping in Apple's desktop operating system. And apparently he left Apple at the start of 2020 to do other interesting things. And it's been noted, I think Michael Larabelle over at Phoronix noted that there's not been many updates to the cups repository that Apple host for a while, which is potentially worrying given that, every Linux distro ships cups and, people actually like to be able to print things, maybe not boarding passes anymore, but, you might want to print something that,
a document.
A document of some kind, yes. I can't actually remember the last time I printed anything. So there was a bit of a worry, but interestingly, the reason why this popped up on my radar was because I was scrolling through the article and noticed that there was a comment on there from a certain Till Camberter, who works as part of the Open Printing organization, which maintains the Linux side of printing, and he works on the desktop team at Canonical. So I just saw his name. I mean, I know he's like the printing guy for Linux, and I've known him for a long time, obviously, because he works at Canonical. But it was just funny seeing a quote from him in an article about Apple on the Register. It just jumped off the page at me, so I just wanted to point to it.
So are we all doomed? Are our printers no longer going to accept jobs and get paper jams and stuff as a result of this, or is everything going to carry on as normal?
Well, it's open source code, so I think everything's going to be fine. They've made a little announcement that they're going to do a temporary fork of the cups repositories so that they can continue using it. And either everyone's going to just move over to the new repository, or it will just be temporary and they'll figure something out and move back to the main repo, depending upon whether Apple decide to pull their finger out and start maintaining it or what.
Maybe they'll develop Apple Print.
I mean, it's not like they took cups and made it all horrible and proprietary and, they couldn't. It's still open source, and it's still all these years, even while Apple were, in inverted commas, stewards of that project, there was still openprinting.org, Linux printing, and people maintaining Linux drivers. So it wasn't the catastrophe a lot of people thought it would be when Apple hired Michael Sweet. So yeah, I just thought it was an interesting article, and it's actually not a disaster at all.
Yeah,
cool. Martin, what's next?
Well, good news. The Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4 is now available.
The what?
Ooh.
Yeah, so these aren't widely known, I think, among sort of like the consumers of Raspberry Pi products, but the compute modules in the past have basically cut down versions of the Raspberry Pi that device manufacturers can embed in their electronics to give it some smarts, some compute power, maybe some GPU power. And through its pins, it exposes, lanes to other devices and peripherals that it can integrate with. And the last one was obviously the Compute Module 3, which was derived from the Raspberry Pi 3. And this is the refreshed edition that is essentially a Raspberry Pi 4 on this cut down mini board that you can use to make, televisions and, smart cars or whatever it is you want to create.
I remember some years ago, you and I being at MWC, and we had some industrial control, like blade things, and inside those were compute modules. I don't know what generation they were back then. It would have been like Pi 2 or something like that.
Probably, yeah.
But it seems like they're very commonly used in industrial settings and people creating products built around the Pi. They don't tend to use a real Pi. Mm-hmm. They put one of these compute modules in because they're small. They don't have all the headers on. They haven't got all the Ethernet and USB and HDMI. The features are there and they come out via pins underneath, but they're not exposed as physical connectors, which makes them smaller and can go in industrial applications.
So one of the things that interests me about this is there's been a few projects over the years to do like a Pi top, like a laptop thing that you buy a chassis and it's got a screen and a keyboard and then you pop a Raspberry Pi in. But because of the form factor of the Raspberry Pi, what you end up with is a really chunky laptop with like a couple of USB ports above each other on the side. But with something like this, someone could make something quite similar, but because of the form factor, it could be more like a laptop case that we're used to, but with one of these inside to give it, the Raspberry Pi power inside a laptop case. And you could even have it expose the GPIO pins for doing all of that fun stuff as well.
Yeah, you could have them as a little connector on the side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But other than that, it could have, USB and Ethernet and Wi-Fi in the useful places and connect to a screen and have with the 4, this is the difference with the Raspberry Pi 4 really, is the extra sort of graphical capability means you could then also even have an external monitor as well, like you have with any other laptop. So I'm really interested to see if somebody does a project like that.
I think it's inevitable. So it starts at $25 for a 1 gig version with no EMCC storage. But there are 32 variations in total of this board with 4 different RAM options. So 1, 2, 4 and 8 gig, and then either micro SD only or with 8 gig, 16 gig and 32 gig of onboard storage. But it's a new form factor. And they've also announced, this is the Raspberry Pi Foundation, the Compute Module 4 I/O board, which I have seen in the flesh and is a thing to behold. And that has 2 HDMI ports on it and 2 USB ports on it. But what I think the thing that's most interesting for a lot of people is it has PCI Express Gen 2 on it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that the Pi 4 supported PCI Express.
So they've sacrificed the USB 3 ports in order to provide enough bus bandwidth for the PCI Gen 2 slot. So if you want USB 3 ports, then you need to plug in a PCI Express card that has USB ports on it.
I guess you could plug some kind of multi-IO thing, but in an industrial setting, I'm not sure you're going to need USB 3 maybe. I don't know, but I guess each use is different. The interesting thing I found about the compute module is it's open hardware. So they're going to provide the KiCad files so you could design your own. So exactly what you're suggesting, Mark, of doing your own laptop, you could take the design and like move all the connectors around so that they're around the sides, around the back, and, make the board smaller to fit a battery pack in or something and make it actually pretty lean. You might even be able to do what the Pine people do, which is take an existing chassis and fit the Pi inside an existing chassis, and that will reduce the industrial design and manufacture dramatically because you're just putting a board in an existing box, basically.
That sounds wonderful. And all you'd need for that is an operating system to power that laptop. And fortunately, Ubuntu is fully enabled for the compute module on day of release. So you can download Ubuntu Server 2004 or Ubuntu Core, and the upcoming desktop release of Ubuntu Desktop 2010 will also work on those, given the appropriate outputs.
Sweet.
Nice.
Have you seen anything else new and interesting in the world, Mark?
Well, yes, there's some other small form factor programmable hardware news. The new BBC microbit has been announced.
Ah, this is the thing that you were using to do the robotics classes, weren't it?
Yes. So this is a small programmable microcontroller board with various input and output bits on it that's mainly used for teaching programming. And this is the first major revision since it was released, some years ago now. So the big additions to it are that there's now a built-in speaker and microphone, which it can use to sense and react to sound, and a capacitive touch sensor on the front of the board. So the board has like a little grid of LEDs which you can use for displaying stuff, and there's a microbit logo above that, and that's now a capacitive touch sensor, which is really interesting because, capacitive touch is most famously used for smartphones, and I think that might be an interesting extra bit of engagement there for kids, that you can program this like you would program your smartphone screen to respond to your touch or your gesture.
Is it just a touch as in whether you're touching it or not, and it can detect the capacitive level or something?
I don't know. I haven't seen that much detail on it yet.
I think this would be most useful because it adds basically an extra button to the front of the thing.
Absolutely.
So you've got more input that you could accept with it.
Yeah, and it's got the same edge connector, which can be used to connect the GPIO pins to other peripherals as well, or to breakout boards for breadboarding and things like that.
I think these are really nice additions. My daughter's recently started programming the microbit, having moved on from scratch. And the accelerometers in the original one are made for some interesting games. The games where you have to sort of move the ball bearing around in a thing. Mm-hmm. Well, Agatha's made a version of that where you get a random dot on the display and you have to roll the other one into it. So you roll it into the hole. But I could see you could use the capacitive touch in order to sort of maybe control that, and move it into position. And the sound is a nice addition as well.
Yes.
I thought they would be a bit rubbish, these microbits, but they've been thoroughly brilliant, and you can do a surprising amount with them. And I was delighted to see they've got 5 million microbits in use for teaching and learning around the world, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction to them was very much the same. I was like, what can you really do with them? And then I saw a room full of kids get hold of them, and I was instantly converted.
Yeah, I think a large proportion of the initial batch went out to school kids. Sophie was in the year that got them first of all, and her school got a whole bunch of them, but they weren't really prepared for it. And so they didn't really have the classes. But now I think it's matured enough, and there's educational resources, and people have understood it a lot better. And now it's matured to the point where, this second generation one will be most welcome, I'm sure.
Yes. And in fact, Sarah from Science Oxford, who we spoke to last year or perhaps the year before on the show, she's now been making their classes available on GitHub.
Oh, nice.
On their GitHub site, so you can actually see all of the teaching materials that they use for the computing clubs there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Finally, introducing the Video Game Source Project. So the Video Game History Foundation has announced this new project, and the Video Game History Foundation is a group of enthusiasts who archive, collect, and exhibit and educate based around video game nostalgia and history. And so they have things like magazines and fanzines and journals that they've archived, and they're educating people about video game development over the years. And they go to conferences and stuff, but they've started this new project, which is the Video Game Source Project. And the goal here is to collect and archive and exhibit and learn from the source code for video games from the past. Right. And the interesting thing about this is not many game developers reveal the source code to their games.
Right.
There's this culture of secrecy where, there's my secrets in that game, whether that's the secrets of the game or the secrets of how I developed the game. And there's that mentality that it shouldn't be open because then I lose my edge over the competition. But also entropy, because developers move on to the next game very quickly and they just forget all about the previous game and may even stop supporting it. And so making the source code available for us working in the open source world makes total sense. But for them, it probably doesn't, because they've forgotten all about that and moved on to the next thing. So I found this super fascinating. It's only recently kicked off last week. The Video Game History Foundation have been around for a while, but this new project to archive source code is super fascinating. And if you scroll down, you'll see some of the exhibits that they've got, be they 5¼ inch floppy disks full of source code or notes from the original developer about how a game was to be constructed. It's super fascinating if you're interested in that kind of stuff.
I assume they've been gifted what they've collected so far, have they?
I think so, yeah. They get some gifts from game developers themselves or people who collected stuff. But I think what they want to do is raise awareness so that developers can talk directly to them. And rather than wait for 30 years and get this, hooray, we got the source code for this thing that was interesting 30 years ago, foster the thought that actually it'd probably be a good idea to start collecting the source code for things that are around now, because people can learn from those things. And I think they want to foster that culture of sharing, not necessarily open source completely, but at least sharing the source code so that you can learn from it in some way. And I think that's feasible without the developers, giving up their lunch money to do it. We'll have a link in the show notes. But if you're in the gaming industry and you think you can get involved in this, you can send them an email to sourcecode@gamehistory.org.
And that's all the news for this week. And that's all for episode 31. Thank you very much for listening. We'd like to say a massive thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and people who have given us one-off PayPal donations to keep the show releasing on time and sounding great. And we'd also like to say a big thank you to Joe Ressington for doing the work to make it sound great. So if you would like some professional podcasting services, you can head over to joeress.com and find him there. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.